Here we go. Okay, hello. I'm Catherine Brown Ramsperger, author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls. Welcome to my story hour. You can call me Kathy. I created Story Hour to connect avid readers and brilliant writers. And if you're one or both, you've come to the right place. Today, we are in for a wonderful chat with author and world explorer, Russell Heath. In his teens, Russell hitchhiked to Alaska and lived in a cabin on the banks of the Tanana River. Do I have it right, Russell? Tanana? Tanana. In his 20s, he lived in Italy and then traveled overland across the Sahara, through the jungles and over the savannas in Africa and into Southern Asia. In his 30s, he sailed around the world alone in a 25-foot wooden boat. And in his 40s, he wrote novels. And in his 50s, he bicycled the spine of the Rockies from Alaska to Mexico. He's worked on the Alaskan pipeline, and he's also worked for an environmental organization fighting to protect Alaska's coastal rainforests. He's now in New York City, where he coaches business and nonprofit leaders intent on making big things happen in the world. He has a lot to say and a lot to chat about today. Welcome, Russell.
Hey, Kathy. Great to be here.
It's great to have you with us. So I want to talk a little about reviews and then description, and then if you would set up the excerpt and then I'll read it for the audience. Russell's second novel, which I've read excerpts from, but in full transparency haven't finished because I read 2 books a week, received a starred Kirkus review. That's a big deal, guys. Kirkus calls it, and it's called Wren's Crossing, a thrilling, engrossing work of serpentine intrigue and crisp characterization with a conservationist conscience. Say that 5 times backwards. But it's important to note they thought Broken Angels, which I have read and absolutely adored, was an auspicious mystery debut. Russell's writing is gritty and his characters dark and brooding, even some of them foreboding, yet his books hold great redemptive power and strength if you keep reading to that end, and the ending in both books is worth it. And you will keep reading. So in Broken Angels, Chris Gabriel, who's a female Alaska native, relentlessly tracks a trail of pain, of lost love, of lives ripped apart, both her own and others, by the frozen North's unyielding jaw of survival to find her mother's killer. I loved her character. In Wren's Crossing, 3 friends, once united by their love of Alaska, betray each other as the epic forces ripping them apart in the state force them to choose sides. So I'd really love if you prefaced what I'm going to read from Wren's Crossing. Russell, I know that it's about Wren realizing his former best friend has committed murder. Is there anything else you want to say about it, or should I just go
That
for it?
pretty much sets it up. So,
All right.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Dan and Wren had been friends. They had fought side by side for better things, and now both were running from crimes neither could have imagined of themselves a few years ago. But the paths that brought them to where they stood now were to Wren as stark and clear as a razor's cut. Any path that you chose through life had obstacles in it, obstacles which, to overcome, required that you nick some part of yourself. It might be your word, your ideals, your love for another, but to continue on the path, you had to compromise something. You hesitated, wondering if it would be wiser to turn back, but you'd already gone this far. Your goals were noble, so noble, and the compromise was so small. So you nicked that part of yourself that the obstacle demanded, and you moved on. The next obstacle was a fraction larger, and again, you wondered whether your path was the right one, but nicking yourself a second time was easier, even if the nick was deeper. And you did it again and again until at some point you'd gone too far to turn back, even when the obstacle that blocked your path was a life. I can't wait to really dig deep into that book. And here I'm going to show the cover. There's also a beautiful cover on Broken Angel, and it's on the Facebook page if you want to look at it. So let's get right into it because we don't have a lot of time for all that Russell can actually talk about. He's really a great storyteller. So did you always intend to write and to write thrillers?
So the answer is kind of. So I always intended to write the same way I always intended to be president or, a supermodel. It's something you have out there that you think, you could do a pretty good job of it, but instead, you go back to your job, slapping burgers at McDonald's. And then one day I was on a kayak trip. It was a long one. It was 3 weeks around the Baranof Island in Southeast Alaska with a friend. And she had with her a book of a mystery by an Alaskan author who shall remain nameless. And after she finished it, I said, well, it wasn't any good. She said, oh, yeah, it's really great. So I read it. And the next day I said, Irene, this sucked. This was terrible. And she said, yeah, I know, but I didn't want to influence your opinion. And I go, my God, I wanted my opinion influenced. I wasted hours of my life reading this. And at that point, I stepped off the cliff. I said, I can do better. And I really have no real love for mysteries because mysteries, in a way, they're too contrived for me. It's all too tied up at the end. And it's, you don't believe that guy killed her for a hangnail. Come on, it's like too trivial in the end. But because this author that I read had written a mystery, I had mystery in my head. So I said, okay, I'll write a mystery. And that's how I got started.
Cool.
And you gotta ask me the
Mary
second
Shelley,
question.
right? Kind of like Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. You're just sitting there one day and somebody challenges you. And so you pick up your pen and it becomes an amazing book.
Yeah, but okay, she wrote Frankenstein at 18. I couldn't have done it at 18.
Okay, got you there. You got me there. For most authors I interview, place is a character, and you were no exception. I don't mean that all authors make place a character. It's just that I'm really attracted to that kind of writing. How long did you live in Alaska, and why is it the setting for both of your novels, considering all of your travels? Why did you choose Alaska?
Yeah, good question. So, well, first, I hitchhiked up to Alaska when I was a teenager. And really, I lived there until 2010 when I moved to New York City. There are a couple gaps in there, but by and large, that was home. And in a way, I still consider it home. I'm a foreigner everywhere else other than Alaska. So I know Alaska really, really well. But there are 2 or 3 reasons why I really wanted to make or write a story in Alaska. The first is that most basic novels about Alaska use Alaska just as a set piece. They don't really understand Alaska. Often they characterize Alaska. They like to say, he spit and his spat froze before it hit the ground. It was 60 below. But Alaska is a different place. If you live somewhere else in the world, you know, the most exciting thing might be stubbing your toe on some busted sidewalk. But Alaska, it's a challenge. It's difficult to live where it's 30 or 40 below. And when I first got up there, you were a long way. You know, there wasn't the infrastructure. Now Alaska's, it looks pretty much like the rest of America, except it's colder. So the thing is that because it's a challenge to live there, and because people go there with intent, if you don't love Alaska, you either whine a lot or you leave. So there's just the physical challenge. And you know, if you share a physical challenge with somebody, there's a camaraderie that gets built, which is really true with Alaskans. The other thing is it's beautiful. It's mind-boggling how beautiful it is. And that beauty, I think, you know, scours your soul too in a different way. It really, you know, it's awe-inspiring. You're transported in a way that you're not in a regular suburb. And then three is that because it's difficult, it changes you. It changes you in different ways. So I wanted to make Alaska a character, and she's a character in different ways in both novels. So in Broken Angels, she's like this god, like a pagan god who's down there toying with the mortals, okay? And each of the main characters in Broken Angels is impacted by Alaska in a different way. And that different way predetermines, again, like a Greek god or goddess, predetermines their decisions that they make in the novel. And often, ultimately, you know, the tragic ends, okay? So yeah, Alaska is a character. And it's a character in a way that a lot of Alaskans really get. Yes, that's the Alaska for me.
Well, I think you've brought it home to us as much as a page can, because I always figured Alaska was beautiful, but some of your passages really brought the beauty to life. So it's obvious it's gotten into your soul. And it's also obvious that you like a challenge. And so maybe that started there too.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, one of the things that drew me to Alaska was the physical challenge of living there. Mm-hmm. I think that we flatten our lives because we make them too convenient and too easy. And whatever the challenge should be, it could be a challenge of living in a very cold place, but it could be a spiritual challenge or an intellectual challenge. But when we take those challenges out of our lives become a little less salty.
Yeah, I agree. So I'd like to talk just a slight bit about your circumnavigation of the globe and how travel informs all your writing. And I guess I wonder why you chose, is there a book in the future about that? Because boy, that was riveting. I watched the Explorers Club video, absolutely riveting. And I'm interested in what you said about fear too, if you care to talk about that or remember what you said, because sometimes I'll say things in a talk and I won't remember exactly. But do you have any fears?
I was quite frank about them in the talk. Yeah. So sailing. So the thing about sailing. Well, first of all, for all your listeners, you know, go up onto YouTube and type in Russell Heath circumnavigation, and the talk to the Explorers Club will pop right up. But I was skiing one day with a buddy of mine. And this is backcountry skiing. We're back up this ridge. We're in the middle of the cloud. We couldn't see a damn thing. And my buddy was a ex-Marine. He'd done two tours in Vietnam and hadn't cut his hair since he'd been mustered out. So his hair was all the way down to his waist. And he had PTSD, but we didn't know about those things back then. Mm-hmm. And he lived on a sailboat. I said, Don, what are you gonna do with that sailboat? Expecting he'd sail it, you know, to the next village over. And he said, I want to sail her into the South Pacific. And I said, you can do that. He said, yeah, sure. His boat was 27 foot long. I said, that's crazy. And we skied off that mountain. I went straight down to the library, to the sailing section to look at boats. I knew nothing about boats and found this old book written by a man named Eric Hiscock who'd sailed around the world. And I read that like a thriller. I could not put it down. And I said, all right, that's what I'm going to do. And I left about 2 years later on a little boat, little wooden boat, beautiful little boat. And I didn't know anything about sailing a reef. I didn't know how to navigate. I didn't know anything. I just launched myself into the North Pacific.
That part's the most amazing part to me. But I know somebody else who was sort of an assistant on a yacht or something. And I've heard that a lot of yachters don't, they just buy this boat and then they start to sail. So I don't,
No, most people, I can be a bit of a jerk here. Most people buy a boat and it sits in the backyard until the wife tells
yeah,
them to
that's
get rid
very
of
true. Well, not
it.
many of them go all the way around the globe, but I do think that it's less rare than the layperson really thinks. That, I mean, who would even teach you, right? You just expect you to go to sailing school or something. Um, so I was riveted just by that fact, that you did it. You just got on the boat and went. That's really cool.
Right.
Well, please do, everybody, listen to that YouTube talk, because it will tell you lots more, including the beautiful story of the boat itself. I love the story of the boat itself in Australia and all that part.
Right.
So you're quite adept at weaving multiple themes into a novel, a lot of themes into a novel. But both of these books, as far as I can tell, are mainly about betrayal and redemption. You'll need to correct me if I'm wrong. Why do you concentrate on these two themes in both?
Well, thank you for that. You know, it's interesting in all the reviews that I've had, all the, you know, ones on Amazon or the professional ones, no one has ever used that word, redemption.
Huh.
Yes, so that's new. And
That's what I got from it.
no, it's great. And here's my cut is that most of us go through our lives and we think we're good people. But I would challenge us that we're good people because the stakes are really low. And when the stakes get high, a lot of that morality that we live by, all those good manners, all those laws, not cheat on our taxes, stop at the red light, even though there's no other car in sight, they go right out the window when we really get tested. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it happens. And the question becomes is, you know, how do we manage that? And what do we do? So in Ridge Crossing, you know, as I mentioned, you asked me whether Alaska is a character. In Ridge Crossing, Alaska is a very different kind of character. It's actually a very different kind of book. And the character that Alaska plays in Ridge Crossing is like an aloof god, kind of like a Calvinistic god, where we people fight over how to worship her, but she doesn't impact us. She doesn't come down and play in the lives of mortals like she did, like Alaska did in Broken Angels. And the question becomes, the way these characters betray each other is they all have a different vision for Alaska. They all have a different story about how Alaska should be, right? And in trying to advocate for their position, that's when they step over the line. For them, the stakes are really high and they step over the line. And of course, they're redeemed, but in the end, and I can't give away anything, but they're redeemed in a very, you know, the technical term is ironic. There's good and there's white and there's black. There's good and evil in their redemption. It's not a perfectly happy ending, because that's how it is in life. You know, we usually don't have unalloyed happy endings.
No, we don't. And I'm always very glad when a book doesn't either. That's just my personal preference. I don't like it being tied up in a red bow. So to piggyback on that, the main characters are so certain that they're right, that the way they see the world is absolute, which I find interesting in the times we're in. That they commit crimes they wouldn't have thought possible if the stakes weren't there. If the stakes weren't there, they were lower. And I'm wondering what you're saying about our relationship with the truth and our capability of all of us turning into criminals or even monsters? I don't know about the monsters actually, but I'd love to hear your take on that. But I know we're all capable of crime. I do.
Yeah, that's what I say. So one of the characters in Rin's Crossing, the woman Kit, you know, at the beginning of the novel, she's a little appalled at what some of the other characters are doing. And Rin, the main character, says, "Well, again, the stakes have just not become high enough for you. You watch." And that's exactly what happens in the end. She descends, right, and comes out at the other end. Yeah, you know, one of the, you know, there's that guy who said he learned all his important lessons in kindergarten. I don't know what his name is, but I learned all my important lessons when I was living in that cabin outside of Fairbanks in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I learned, so I was an idiot, I was an ideologue. I wanted, like, to say the Alaska pipeline was the greatest crime committed against the planet, and I was horribly against it. And I was I was fanatical. I was only a teenager could be fanatical. You know, we're just so certain that we're right. And so I'm sitting up there in my little cabin, right, broke, and there are all these other people around me, all these other cabins where people were starting to work on the pipeline. They came back with tremendous amounts of money. And I wanted to go to college. And I said, whoa, that would pay for my tuition. And eventually it took like most of the winter, and I sold out and I went and worked on the pipeline. So I betrayed my values for money, right? That's the only thing that did it. And I realized that the lesson I learned is that, yeah, we can all step over the line, that we can say, yes, this is what's important to me. But if something else comes over there, we can betray ourselves, betray our values. And that was good in that I loosened up. So I judged people less harshly than I had before. And of course, I judged myself less harshly as well.
That's nice. That's nice. So I'd like to break just for a few minutes for questions. Kaylee, do we have any?
Yes, hello everyone. It's good to be back. We have a few different comments and one question. So we have a few hellos. So from Kathleen Rogers, she's just saying hello. She's tuning in from Northern Texas. And she loves the cover of Broken Angel. She lived in the interior of Alaska for 3 years from 85 to 88, and she knows the beautiful Tanana Valley, if that's how you pronounce it correctly, Tanana. And her sons were born in the land of the midnight sun. So she's here, and she loves what you said, Russell, about when the stakes go high. We also have a hello from Joe Rivera. She is coming from, or he, or they, are coming from Niceville, Florida. And Christy says hello as well. And then we have a question from Tatiana Ramzoff. She says, hello, Russell. How do you come up with your characters? Are they composites of people you've known?
Boy, that's a tough one. So one of the so hi to everybody, and great to meet somebody also from the Tanana Valley decades ago. So I guess the way I come up with my characters is I come up with the premise of what I want to have happen in the novel, and then try and figure out what kind of character, right, would both be crushed and then crushed, what's the opposite word? Crushed by the circumstances, then have the grit to rise up to them, meet them, and conquer them. Right? So for instance, in Broken Angels, so one of the problems I had when I decided to write a mystery is I didn't know how to get started. And I read a book by Jane Smiley, who was who's still alive, but she just won a Pulitzer Prize for a book called 1,000 Acres. And when you're reading 1,000 Acres, you understand that it's a scene-by-scene ripoff of King Lear. So I decided to rip off a play that was out of copyright, and the author was dead, so he wouldn't come and sue me. And I took Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. You know, that was 2,500 years ago, so I figured I was
I love
safe.
it so much.
So the character of Oedipus, right, who kills his father and marries his mother, became Chris in the novel. And so what I wanted Chris to be is a woman who was so committed to her point of view, right, to her truth, that she ended up committing a ghastly crime in service of finding the person who had killed her mother. So that's what I wanted first, as a person who is very kind of adamant, and then over the course of the novel has to soften up and has to understand the own blackness in her soul, right, in a really interesting way. And so I just have to figure it out as we go. It's tough. For me, developing a character is probably the most difficult part of writing.
Yeah. And for me, the plot is. So I think we all have our strengths. The characters just sort of appear one day and follow me around and say, write about me. So it's really an interesting contrast. Anything else, Kaylee?
I don't know, I'd be scared of some of my
Oh, well.
Yes, we have one more question from Noelle Puglisi. She asks, Russell, would you ever consider writing something funny? You expose a good sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. No, that's much more scary than writing a thriller. Much more vulnerable to try and be funny because you don't know if somebody's going to laugh. But listen, there's some really, really good lines in Rin's Crossing, and I think 90% of the readers don't see them. And I would challenge you, the person who asked the question, I would challenge you to read Rin's Crossing and see if you can find all the funny lines, because your sense of humor has to be very nuanced and subtle to pick them up.
All right, that is all we have in the comment section for now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kaylee, and thank you for your answers, Russell. And I think that's the best kind of humor, is the parts that people don't know whether you're being funny or not. I'm married to a man like that. So you write so well the female point of view, and now I'm finally catching on to some of the reasons why. But I think it's a talent. I don't think many people can do it well. And I write in a male point of view. And why did you choose a female point of view? Was it part of the Oedipus Rex story, or like why is the main, at least the one I connected to in Broken Angels, a female? I guess that's the real question.
Yeah, it's a totally mechanistic reason. So I decided again to use Oedipus Rex. Mm-hmm. And Oedipus in the play was searching for the truth. So I had to ask, what would somebody in the 21st century be searching for? What's the truth? And the two ideologies that I was most familiar with was environmentalism or feminism. And I didn't want to do environmentalism because if it gets too ideological, it's just boring. It's just a rant. Okay. So I chose feminism. And that made the character have to be female. So that's what it was. And as the book grew, as I got into the book, that whole ideological thing disappeared. You can pick up little traces of it, but I got less and less on the ideology and more it focused on the character, So it was a total mechanistically reasonable way. And if I could tell you a little funny story.
Yes, please.
So I'm halfway into my first or second draft of Broken Angels, and of course, I'm distressed. It's a total mess. This will never work. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm thinking of the standard advice is always write.
You're a writer.
Right, well, so here I am. I'm writing about, my main character is a woman. What do I know about women? I'm a total disaster with women. What do I know? And she's a native. And what do I know about natives? And then she grew up on the streets of Fairbanks. And I grew up in your standard middle-class American family where I had Cheerios every morning. And I had no experience of living on the street. And so that just crushed me. Whatever. So one day, so I was in Maine at the time because for other reasons, I went back to school, and I was down at the strip mall doing my laundry early one Saturday morning. And there's my car in the lot, and there's one other car in the lot, and the other car has a Maine license plate, and I have an Alaska license plate. So I'm sitting there watching my BVDs go around and around in the dryer, and this car drives up. and it's got an Alaska plate on it. I mean, we're in Maine, right? And this woman gets out and she comes in, and I wait till she dumps her laundry in the washer, and I go up to her and say, boy, it's pretty amazing that 2/3 of the cars in the Stillwater parking lot in Maine are from Alaska. And she turns out to be a social worker from Fairbanks who works with street kids, most of whom are native, who are growing up on the street in Fairbanks. And I said, well, this is how I do my research, is hang out in laundromats.
It's a great place, isn't it?
I said, you're coming home to dinner. So I drug her home, we had dinner, and I just pumped her for all the stories. So a lot of the stories, even the ghastly ones, about Chris growing up on the streets of Fairbanks are actually true stories. Though I didn't expect
I knew it had to either be life experience or really good research, because I don't know about Alaska or a native Alaskan, right? But
right.
The female responses to what happens are spot on. So thank you for that. It really, I read a lot of very flat female characters that aren't developed well by men, and you got it right. At least in that category, I'd have to defer to an Alaskan for the rest of it. But
well, if I could ask you a question, because there are two main criticisms that I got of the novel. One is the people who like mysteries, the ending wasn't tied up enough, so they can suffer. But the other criticism was that many readers did not like Chris. They did not like her. She was too hard. She was too angry. And I was just wondering what your response to that criticism is.
There were times I didn't like her, but I liked her. I understood her, and to me, that makes me want to keep reading, to figure out what makes a character tick and do the things that he or she does. And maybe it wouldn't have worked in a novel that wasn't a thriller, but I thought it made sense in this one. But then again, I don't like characters that don't have a depth to them. She had a depth to her, and that's why I liked her. She also was doing something for her mother, even though, spoiler alert, even though her mother had abandoned her basically. And that was enough for me. I thought somebody that's going to do that kind of thing, especially after what she learns about her mother after she starts the investigation. I liked her. Was she somebody I would want to hang out with? No, but I liked her as a character very much. Yeah. So let's go on to a little bit in terms of how you handle the multiple points of view and the pacing. Because we have a lot of writers that listen in, you do it really seamlessly. And I teach too. And so I'd love to be able, I've never really been able to explain how to do multiple points of view to students either. So did you have I know you just said you went in like you did with your circumnavigation, but did you know how many characters you would have? Because there are a lot of characters.
Well, in Rin's Crossing, there's so many characters, I had to have a list at the beginning of the book. But I remember reading, so I read tons and tons of how to write novels, stories, novel writing for dummies kind of things. And I remember one author saying, never have too many points of view. And so in Broken Angels, I have only 4 points of view. Lots of characters, but we're only in the heads of 4 different characters. And in Rin's Crossing, I think I kept to 4. I can't remember right now. I may have slipped over to 5.
Only 4 and only 5 is not only, though. Most people that write a first novel would be sticking to 1 point of view, maybe 2. So it's impressive that you did that on your first try. It is.
I mean, the novel was complex enough that you couldn't have had a single point of view and make it all clear to the reader.
No, and nor would it have, nor would it have shown the whole story about perspective.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
How it impacts all the different.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody relates to the core of the issue differently. Well, you know, what's the word I want? I'm a structured writer. So I needed to know where the book was going. I needed to know what motivated each of the characters. Okay. I had to know and I had to work out each of the characters' arcs throughout the novel. Okay. And how they intertwined. And I learned a lot about myself and how my head works, because you have a structure, you have a technical structure, but you still have to get the characters to move from point to point and have it be believable within what the character's character. And I would sit there, and particularly I was in a writer's group, and I had this one woman, she was a professor of English, and I call her Mistress Implausible, because she's always writing implausible all over my script, and all my manuscript. And I got furious. That's the way we do it in Alaska. You know? And Mistress Implausible. But what she forced me to do is to go back and think, and I'd have to think of new ways to move the characters that were within the context of the characters. And I would leave those writing group absolutely crushed and furious, and then I'd lie in bed at night and just 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden your mind would come up with these great ideas, and it would, and you don't know where those ideas are coming from, right? They're coming into your head, and you don't know what's producing them, but it would make the novel richer and thicker and much better. And so I would, I'd gird my loins and I'd rewrite the whole damn scene, and I'd come back to the writers group and say, so there. Is that implausible now?
I know I hate those implausible sidebar comments. I really do. I'm working with one right now, and I finally just somebody said they'd set the book down if this happened and never pick it up again. And I thought, oh well, I guess you're not going to read my next novel, because I could never get it. Pardon me?
I just got another Amazon comment on Rin's Crossing, and it was from a man, I don't know him, who's from Southeast Alaska, where I've spent 25 years of my life, and he says, this is implausible. Anybody who lives in Southeast Alaska knows this can't happen. And I'm thinking, what the hell does he think is implausible? This is standard stuff. I've done it all my life. So I need to meet him in a bar someday and rattle his cage. All right.
Implausible to one is not implausible to another as well, right? What? Your life has been not the ordinary. You've lived an extraordinary life. So, but I still hate that word. Do you consider your work social justice fiction? What about environmental fiction? Or are they just books to be read as books?
Yeah, who is that movie director said, if I have a message, I'll send a telegram.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
I have a lot of trouble with ideology. My interest is in how people relate to their beliefs and not the beliefs themselves. Because if you look through history, we humans have all kinds of different crazy beliefs. And the beliefs that we have today are crazy too, and 20 years from now, we won't buy them. Our understanding of feminism, our understanding of social justice, our understanding of what it means to be human will be different 20 years from now. And we'll still have the same damn fights.
Yeah.
So the question for me is less the ideology. I don't want to send an ideological message. What I want to send is a human message. And the human message is that despite, no matter what we've got going on in our heads, no matter how we view the world, what is truth to us, we're going to relate to it in the same way. And ultimately, our only pathway, and again, use the term redemption, our only pathway forward as human beings is opening up our hearts and connecting to other people and coming essentially from integrity and authenticity. And that's what it is, regardless of what we think. And that to me is our path forward. It's not an ideological path forward. It's a redemptive path forward.
I agree. And I was about to say, and that's why your books are redemptive in nature. Fantastic. Thank you for that answer. So I want everybody to know that both endings are worthy of a page-turning thriller. I know it was in Broken Angels, and in Amazon reviews over and over, they say how well the ending worked. So we talked about structure. Do you outline, or do you just know the beginning, middle, and end and work your way toward it?
Well, I start with the ending. All right. What is it that I want to have happen? And then I don't really work backwards. I work forward towards that ending. And again, Rin's Crossing is far more complex than Broken Angels. So Broken Angels has like 4 or 5 main characters. Rin's Crossing has 4 main characters and like 30 secondary characters. And it's because of 5 stories. There are 5 interweaving, interlocked plots in Rin's Crossing. And, I was curious, my biggest worry about Rin's Crossing, it was too complex for people. Particularly, there's this whole legislative subplot thriller, right, that goes through there. And it's like a police procedural, but it's a legislative procedural where it's very factual. I mean, you look at the front of the cover of Rin's Crossing, and it's blogged, it's blurbed by the governor of Alaska, the former governor of Alaska, Tony Knowles.
Read it. Put on your life jacket, grab a paddle, and enjoy the trip. And here's the cover again.
Right. Former governor of the state of Alaska. So I've had a lot of political people read it, and not one of them has come back and said, this is implausible, right? I mean, it's a little juiced.
But I think that maybe your lobbying days might have given you some insight into that, or not?
Totally. I mean, yes. And what was ironic is that my lobbying days was long before my novel writing days, and I didn't realize I was doing research then. But legislators are full of themselves, right? And so they get around and they get this little.
I live in the land of it.
They're full of themselves, and what they want to do is brag, and they always want to brag about all these crazy things they've done. And I'm sitting there sucking it all in. So every one of the dirty tricks, the manipulations of procedure that happened in Rin's Crossing happened in real Alaskan history, except the last one. The last one I made up, but otherwise, that's all there. There were people that snuck away and hid so that they couldn't have votes in the legislature. There were people that stole the bill file. The bill file is the official accounting of a bill, and you can't do any legislative business if the bill file isn't present. So there are people that stole that bill file so nothing could go forward on that bill. Anyway, all those stories are, if anybody out there thinks they're implausible, they happened.
Well, and it also shows how we never know. I always tell people not to throw their writing away, not to throw their journals away, not to throw their memories away, because you never know when you're going to be able to use it if you're a writer.
If you're a writer, yeah.
So thank you so much. We're going to open it up to questions. But first, I'd really like to know what's next for you. I can't wait to hear what it is. I know you're a coach too, and please tell people where they can find your work and where they can find you.
All right, well, lots of net questions. I'll be quick. So what's next for me? Well, I'm building a boat, and it's a rowing boat. It's technically called a wherry, and I just started lofting her 2 weeks ago. Lofting her is putting the lines down, and I will row her around Newfoundland in 2023. And then 2, I am starting a book about sailing around the world. It's going to be a contemplative essay with lots of vomit because I got seasick. And then
I skipped over that part. That's my fear. I have a fear of vomit. So
I got really familiar with mine.
I'm sure you did. I could not sail around the world, obviously.
So those, and then those are my two big projects here. Is the book, the nonfiction book, and then building the boat. Those are the two big projects. And then what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I'm going to ask it, but I wanted to ask, it'll take you a full year. You'll be in Newfoundland for a whole year. So you'll be there through the seasons, or?
It'll take me 2 years to build the boat, and it's 2,500 miles around the island if I go into a lot of the bays, and I'm hoping I can do that in one season from May to August.
Okay, because that was really interesting. An interesting part of your other trip was the season changes and being able to survive it all. So congrats on that. I would really love, and I know everybody listening would love for you to tell us where they can find you mainly, because I know your book is on all the online retailers and they can probably get it through your website too.
So my writing website is russellheathauthor.com. And really all you have to do is Google Russell Heath, Ringe Crossing, or Broken Angels, and it'll pop up. And then my coaching website is russellheath.net. Okay, and again, you Google Russell Heath Coach and I'll pop up. Mm-hmm. And I'd be glad to talk to anybody in either capacity.
Well, I've really enjoyed today. And one surprise that I didn't get to tell you beforehand is that I always have a piece of tea bag wisdom, and it's always right. So I think you've told us a lot about living life, even if that living life on the edge can make you happy. And even though you have challenges, that's what life's about. And this is what I pulled for you. I know it's very, 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 very small, but I'm going to read it to you. I like to show people that I'm not just making it up. If we are happy, everybody looks up and shares our happiness. It's a little bit like shining your light. And thank you for doing that for us today.
Yeah, we just have 2 questions from Noelle Puglisi. So I'll ask them separately. So the first question is, excluding your own, what is your favorite novel?
Well, it depends on my mood, really. I mean, we contain multitudes. I read a recent novel. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I was super, super impressed with it, by a woman named Geraldine Brooks. And it was called I think it was called A Year of Wonder. It was about a plague. It took place in the 17th century in Britain, about a community that walled itself off, that isolated itself from the rest of the country because it had plague. And I listened to the audio version, and Geraldine Brooks narrated, and her narration was exquisite, and the book itself I thought was just very good in terms of managing the characters and the situation. With one exception, the ending was bizarre. It was Deus Ex Machina. If anybody has read that book and has a cut on that ending, I'd certainly like to hear their thoughts. But generally, I like novels that are almost poetic in their use of language. I really, really love good language. Even it can be minimalist, but if the words are well put together, I'll really appreciate it. I'm rambling here, but I'm reading right now Absalom by Faulkner. It was one of my favorite novels. I read it when I was crossing the Indian Ocean many years ago, so I needed to read it again. So I'm halfway through that.
You do like words, if you like Faulkner.
I like semicolons. That's why I read Faulkner. I had to take 1,100 semicolons out of Broken Angels because the editor wouldn't allow it.
Just about to say, I feel like semicolons are a bit unpopular these days. So
they are. I have an editor that says semicolons should never have been invented. I don't agree with that, but I think that you can use too many at times. Okay, Kaylee, what's next?
Yeah. We have the one last question from Noelle, and she asks, do you have a favorite novel that influenced you and motivated you to dive in to write your own? I know you mentioned that book, that mystery you read, and you're like, this was awful. Now I'm motivated to write my own, but were there any others that motivated you?
No, it was probably a reverse motivation. So I'd read these books and I go, how do these guys do it? I can never do anything this good. I should just go back to flipping burgers. So, so it was only because I ran across something that was just horrific. Uh, and it was a bestseller, but anyway, it's still horrific. And
Plenty of those.
that's what motivated me. So I'm not being very noble here, but that's the way it is.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Tatiana and Noel, for your questions. Thank everybody for coming. Any final words, Russell?
Well, I would certainly like to hear from people if they do read Broken Angels and Ridge Crossing, what they thought, what they could have done better. I have like zero ego in these books. I'm just fascinated by what people think. And in Broken Angels, for instance, everybody had something they didn't like about it, and it was so diverse. I kept a list. I had 12 or 15 things that people didn't like, and they weren't all the same, except for the ending and not liking Chris. Otherwise, everybody had their own.
Gosh, am I the only person that maybe I did? Maybe there was something I didn't like. I'll have to go look at my review. But I loved it. I really did, and was afraid I would hate the ending. I probably went more slowly because I thought, oh no, but I didn't. I really loved the ending. So
it had to have been a surprise to you.
Pardon?
It had to have been a surprise to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody read Russell's books. Thanks for being here today. Next week we'll be interviewing Ellen Burkett Morris. She's a poet and author of Lost Girls, a collection of stellar stories. You won't want to miss this one because she's a finalist in the Rita Dove Poetry Prize, the Reynolds Prize Fiction Award, Glimmer Train Family Matters, and her stories have appeared in Antioch Review, Shenandoah, and many others. I'm so excited to meet her. Find more about him and his work at russellheathauthor.net. And you can find more about me and my work at shoresofoursouls.com, including some of my stories and essays, and ground1coaching.com, which is all about my coaching. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend with a great book. Bye for now.
Thank you, Kathy.
Pleasure, Russell. Bye.